redacted version. Today, I read a secret no foreign version, which means that the information in that report, including information that the Secretary of Defense released, would be severely damaging to U.S. national security if it was released. And in the aftermath of the Signalgate, the release of those text messages, I spoke to a mother down in Fredericksburg in my district in Virginia, who was the mother of a pilot that was in the skies over Yemen during that time. And I tell you, she was absolutely outraged by the Secretary's conduct, the very basic operational security that we trained privates on, in the first few weeks. He violated that. And this report, this damning report, confirms that. He needs to go. He should have been fired in the aftermath of that report and every day since.
General Hertling, the Pentagon put out a statement on the IG report today. It reads in part, the Inspector General review is a total exoneration of Secretary Hegseth and proves what we knew all along. No classified information was shared. This matter is resolved and the case is closed. This is from the Chief Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell. General, I would argue that tonight, much like last night, is really about the administration trying to manipulate the public's view of what it is we can see with our own eyes and what it is we just know to be true. Anyone, whether they had a security clearance at one point in time, like myself, or not, when they heard that the Secretary of Defense and other administration officials, let's just be very clear, he wasn't the only person in that chat, added a journalist to a Signal chat where they were discussing an active live mission. That sounds off to anyone. You don't need a security clearance to know that. But yet, in the aftermath of us first finding out about this in April, and even today, you have the Pentagon literally trying to gaslight us. They are trying to manipulate our understanding of what is legal, of what is ethical, and what is true.
All of those things you just said, Simone, are true. It was April 3rd when they started this investigation. It's now December 3rd, several months later, where they've concluded the investigation, and they have placed the blame on Secretary Hegseth for using an unauthorized device. By the way, when he has several authorized devices that he could have used to signal the kinds of things that he was signaling. And so do all the others that were on that chat stream. So by using a commercially available device that allegedly has greater than encryption than most, it just shows a lack of understanding of what other countries can do in terms of intercepting our signal applications. So yeah, Mr. Parnell, who put that statement out today, is gaslighting us. And I rarely use those kind of words, but when you read that statement, I mean, long ago, back in April, all of us who have ever used, as Congressman Vindman just said, all of us in the military who have ever used encrypted devices or signaled or communicated the kind of classified information that the Secretary was doing knows that they were doing something wrong. And they were opening up our communication to other nations to intercept. So I just don't understand what the Pentagon is claiming when they're saying that he's free and clear of all the things that he's done.
Here's the thing, Congressman, the incompetence, the recklessness, the complete disregard for human life, it may begin with Signalgate, but there's an absolute through line to what we are watching this administration do off the coast of Venezuela. The president was asked about it today. I want you to take a listen to how his messaging is beginning to change. Take a listen.
If it is found that survivors were actually killed while clinging onto that boat, should Secretary Hegseth, Admiral Bradley, or others be punished?
I think you're going to find that this is war, that these people were killing our people.
So to be clear, you support the decision to kill survivors after the
No, I support the decision to knock out the boats, and whoever's piloting those boats, most of them are gone. But whoever are piloting those boats, they're guilty of trying to kill people in our country.
Okay, so too much to fact check there because they've not actually substantiated any of these claims about the threat to American life, to American soil. The fact that he's now not differentiating between that second strike, he's saying, I just said took the boat out. I mean, we're either talking about murder or war crime. So the fact that he is choosing to stand with Pete Hegseth in that choice makes him just as culpable as the commander-in-chief. Am I understanding that correctly?
100%. In fact, there's a doctrine of command responsibility that if a commander, in this case the commander-in-chief, is aware of war crimes being committed and he does not take actions to remedy that, then he himself, whether he gave the order in the first place or not, becomes liable for war crimes. And so the president needs to understand that he is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, the U.S. Armed Forces, and that he has direct liability unless he takes action. And that action should be the removal of Pete Hegseth, a full investigation on what happened here, and making sure this never happens again. We actually executed, after a trial, U-boat commanders that did something very similar when they executed shipwrecked sailors that were clinging on for dear life on a boat that were obviously out of combat. They were held accountable for that. And the president and the secretary are committing those very same crimes. It's reprehensible.
Congressman, I want to stick with you for a moment on that point, because that, for me, is a critical aspect of the what happens next. Because right now, we're kind of still a little bit in the discovery phase of this. There's more to come. You've read the report, and that's going to get released. We'll all be able to look at it and digest it. And it says a lot about what this Secretary of Defense knew, didn't know, didn't do. And so that's going to be a judgment that's going to be made over the course of time. The politics of this is also equally important, because the next piece that you're talking about is accountability. All right. You talked about what happened to those soldiers who killed, U-boat, personnel who were trying to survive. Similarly here, there's going to be accountability. And this is where next year's elections matter, because that accountability will not otherwise come until such time as the Democrats take control of the chamber and have full access, full-throated access to all of the avenues of accountability that they can access. Because this is a moment where I think we have to show the country one of two things. Either this Secretary of Defense is not just incompetent, but also culpable, or he's not. And so that becomes a very important piece here when you're looking at the what next. Because I otherwise believe that if Republicans have control continually, that this gets swept under the carpet. The noise, I'll put it that way, we heard out of this president's mouth in that clip, right, is just noise. It's a lie. He claims at one point he doesn't know what's going on, and then at another point he's the commander-in-chief. So all of this for me connects in that regard in terms of accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going back to, that stream of consciousness that we heard from the president saying that we are at war, that's actually not the case. Congress declares war. We have not declared war. And so that earlier point about what these operations are, whether this is murder and U.S. military killing drug traffickers, or this is war crimes, we're somewhere in this criminal investigation phase. I will tell you, in my experience, 25 years in the Army as a prosecutor, as an advisor, this operation being the first of its kind would be well papered. There would be legal opinions. There would be video to review. There would probably be audio tapes. We
were talking about that today.
A ton of different things that need to come out in order for us to determine what happened. Frankly, what are we going to be a country that sweeps war crimes and murder under the rug and allows our military, our uniformed service members to be the ones that are thrown under the bus? Because that's what the secretary is doing now. He's throwing a highly decorated admiral under the bus. Or are we going to hold the political leaders, the ones that are coming up with these terrible ideas and directing soldiers and service members to do this, accountable? And that investigation, and there have been commitments from the Senate Armed Services and the House Armed Services Committee that we're going to look into this issue very closely. We need to follow through, and we need to keep the pressure on. We can't allow this to be swept under the rug.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We have a president who is, of course, the oldest man ever to be sworn into office in this country's long history. And it's showing. Today, he went on a disgusting tirade about Somali immigrants, many of whom are Americans, that even by his own degraded standards was egregiously racist.
Somalia is considered by many to be the worst country on earth. I don't know. I haven't been there. I won't be there anytime soon, I hope. But what Somalia, what the Somalian people have done to Minnesota is not even believable. It's not even believable. And a lot of it starts with the governor. A lot of it starts with Barack Hussein Obama, because that's when people started coming in. And you have to have people come in that are going to love our country, cherish our country. They want to kiss our country goodnight.
There's a lot about that appearance that was both strange and things that we've come to sort of see as normal. You may have noticed Trump kept his hand under the table there. In fact, he appeared to be going out of his way to hide his right hand specifically. That's the same hand that just yesterday was covered with makeup and Band-Aids, the same hand that has had large bruises on it in the past. As for the substance of his remarks, Trump has always been a bigot, going back many decades. He's clearly having a harder time keeping rants like that inside. In fact, today's spectacle comes after a similar tirade yesterday. Also, he's repeating himself a lot. That one was during a cabinet meeting, mostly focused on Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and those pretty clearly unlawful boat strikes, although admittedly, Trump seemed to sleep through quite a bit of it. In fact, at one point, and I think this might be an indelible image of this entire presidency when all is said and done, at one point, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was heaping praise on the great man for his singular leadership, as the man next to him, the president, appeared to be nodding off.
This war is going on, and the president is trying to end it, not because, listen, we got a million things to focus on in the world as a country, but he's the only leader in the world that can help end it. And that's why even as we speak to you now, Steve Woodcock is in Moscow trying to find a way to end this war, to save lives of 9,000 people, Mr. President, as you know, are dying every week.
Have you ever seen a more awake man? A more virile man? A man of more implacable energy than this man here, Mr. President? I'm talking about you. The Washington Post counted a total of 6 minutes where Trump's eyes were closed or he otherwise struggled to stay awake. And so in response, the White House brought out its defenders to explain why everything is fine.
I read this article, like President Trump is slowing down, President Trump's mental capacity. It is 100% fake. That, like, he only called me twice at 2 in the morning last week instead of 3 times.
You may sleep less than the president, Brad, and that is a remarkable thing because I don't think he sleeps at all.
Fox News even brought out their senior medical analyst to talk about how great naps are.
Social media goes crazy, and the left is going crazy after totally deep-sixing any concern about Biden for 4 years. And they went crazy because at one point today, when Rubio was talking, President Trump had his eyes closed for, a few seconds. It seemed like a few seconds. But they went crazy. Like, he's sleeping during meetings. Like, your reaction tonight?
I think he seems extremely sharp, and I think this whole thing is a bait and switch. This is a disgrace because we don't need to see President Trump passing cognitive tests. As you just said, he passes one every single day, every single moment, going in and out of press conferences. I've never seen anything like it, actually. Thomas Edison believed in the 10-minute nap, by the way. What would they say? We wouldn't have electricity, right?
Now, I'll level with you here. I, too, am a great believer in naps. I do try to avoid them while I'm on air with you. It goes without saying that the 79-year-old president is no Thomas Edison. Maybe it's just the normal process of aging. I mean, he is, 79. Maybe it's something more. I don't know. We know the president had an MRI a few weeks ago, which he weirdly kind of tangentially introduced and mentioned. It was part of what the White House initially said was his annual physical. In fact, it was his second annual physical of the year. Usually the annual physical happens once a year, at least that we know about. Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't think an MRI is generally part of a normal checkup. And then when asked about it, Trump has been super dodgy.
Did you get an MRI? Can you tell us what that was?
I got an MRI. It was perfect. Yeah. I mean, I gave you the full results. We had an MRI.
MRI, and in the machine, the whole thing. And it was perfect.
Why did President Trump get an MRI during his recent visit to Wall Street?
Look, as President Trump said, he would inquire with the physicians. I'll check back on that. But as the physical itself stated, Kristen, and as you all know, because you were all witness to it, every single day the president is in optimal physical health.
I had an MRI as part of my standard yearly, or I think they do it every 2 years, but I have the physical every year, and the result was outstanding.
Is it your brain?
Did you know? I have no idea what they analyzed, but whatever they analyzed it well, and they said that I had as good a result as they've ever seen. If you want to have it released, I'll release it.
Please. Can you tell us what they were looking at?
For what, releasing?
No. What part of your body was the MRI looking at?
I have no idea. It was just an MRI. What part of the body? It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing. Goodbye, everybody. You too.
This level of detailed assessment is standard for an executive physical at President Trump's age and confirms that he remains in excellent overall health.
Now, his doctor eventually put out a vague statement saying he was looking at Trump's heart and he is in, quote, excellent health. Trump's doctors also say he's the same height and weight as NFL quarterback Patrick Mahomes, so you could make of that what you will. The president's decline is evident in more than just anecdotal observations. New York Times recently published an extensive account of his truncated schedule and shorter work days. And again, even just watching the guy, which unfortunately for all of us here is our job to do every day, it is obvious that his behavior is becoming increasingly aberrant, strange, and sleepy. He's posting late into the night, at one point about 150 times in one stretch, amplifying a post claiming that Nancy Pelosi's staff had been planning the January 6th insurrection for months. Sure, right. He's lashing out at reporters while seeming to be a kind of spectator to his own presidency.
Sir, is there something incriminating in the file, sir?
Why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let him in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?
The government at the time said that CZ had caused significant harm to U.S. national security, essentially by allowing terrorist groups like Hamas to move millions of dollars around. Why did you pardon him?
Okay, are you ready? I don't know who he is.
Explain more about why you pardoned a notorious drug trafficker.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Juan Fernando.
Well, I was told that I was asked by Honduras.
There's a mic drop moment. Okay, are you ready? No idea who the guy is. Now, at some level, Trump's decline, if it's happening, it seems like it is one of those weird positions of, the food is terrible in such small portions. But the reason all this matters so much is twofold. One, it's hard to believe that this is the person who's actually running the country minute to minute, leaving us to wonder who is filling the power vacuum of the napping president, whose agendas are being implemented, right? And two, Trump's entire source of power, this is crucial, the way that he has kept his second term afloat is through this domineering monopoly on his own party, this kind of ruthless discipline he's imposed on his fellow Republicans. And that only works so long as people in the Republican Party don't start to think too hard about how long he can keep it all going.
In this sense, it looks to me like they're trying to pin the blame on somebody else and not them. There's a very distinct statement was said on Sunday. Secretary Hegseth said he had no knowledge of this and it did not happen. It was fake news. It didn't happen. And then the next day from the podium with the White House, they're saying it did happen. So either he was lying to us on Sunday or he's incompetent and didn't know it had happened. As a country, are we just going to let people lie to us to our face?
There's a Republican asking that question. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. Quote, he's lying or it's incompetence. Neither of those are qualities anyone would want from the person in charge of leading the mighty United States military, the most lethal and powerful fighting force in the world. The scrutiny over Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's leadership of the Pentagon is mounting on two fronts today. His role in the likely illegal double-tap boat strike in the Caribbean, and the story we brought you at the top of the last hour, that a Pentagon watchdog or inspector general has found that Pete Hegseth put U.S. personnel at risk when he used the Signal app to communicate with other members of Donald Trump's national security team. When it comes to the boat strikes, Pete Hegseth's changing story is leaving more questions than answers. From saying he watched the operation in an appearance on Fox News and celebrating and touting it as a success, to saying he was simply too busy to have watched the entire operation, including the second strike that occurred after the first strike, and then scapegoating the officer in charge of the operation, Admiral Frank M. Bradley. Pete Hegseth is making clear that he does not remotely believe that the buck comes anywhere near him at the Department of Defense. Admiral Bradley, for his part, is a decorated Navy SEAL. He will appear before the Senate Armed Services Committee tomorrow to answer some of the questions Pete Hegseth has left lawmakers like Rand Paul with scratching their heads. As for why this accountability that lawmakers, again, Democrats and Republicans, are seeking, why it's so important, here's what Democratic Senator Jack Reed, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said on this network.
We have to ensure that the military of the United States fulfills its legal obligations. And one of the fundamental reasons is because if we expect our personnel to be treated under the laws of war, not to be abused or to be killed when they're, as they say, hors de combat, then we must insist that our troops follow the same laws.
Well, the Trump administration would have us believe that ensuring our military follows the laws of war is some controversial thing. Here's what Pete Hegseth actually said about it in the year 2016.
I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander-in-chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
There's a standard to not follow unlawful orders. But when 6 Democratic lawmakers said that, almost the same exact words, to remind the men and women of the military of that same standard, we'll call it the Hegseth standard, at least from the year 2016, while there are potentially illegal acts being carried out, those 6 lawmakers are accused of sedition by Donald Trump and the same Pete Hegseth. I want to bring in Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan. She's a member of the Armed Services Committee and one of those 6 Democratic lawmakers who made the video urging the men and women of the military not to accept or follow unlawful orders. I believe we found that video among some of the things that your social media platforms recirculated. And I wonder what you think changed.
I think one of the hallmarks of our time right now in Washington is that a lot of people just don't have a center of gravity, right? I think they don't have a standard set opinion on something. They have an opinion if the other team did something. And, hearing Pete Hegseth from 2016, I was actually heartened to hear him say that. But fast forward less than a decade, and here he is saying the exact opposite thing and repeating what the president is saying. So I just think that there's no center of gravity for these folks. They don't have ideological certainty about things. They don't call balls and strikes on whether you're a Democrat or Republican. If it's against Democrats, they're against it. I mean, they're for it. And if it's their own team doing something, then they have a completely different opinion.
Did the Washington Post story and the Hegseth and Trump reaction to it make their furious reaction to the video you and 5 other lawmakers released, simply telling the men and women of the military not to follow any orders that are unlawful or illegal? Did it add up once that Post story broke?
Well, certainly, we made this video. We had made other videos before on other topics. No one expected one sentence taken from the Uniform Code of Military Justice to set off to hit that kind of nerve with the president and the Secretary of Defense. I think we saw a really outsized reaction, and it was sort of like, you're protesting a little too much. And the funniest commentary I saw, I think on TV was someone said, like, if you walk into a crowded bar and someone yells, "Hey, ugly," and you turn around, like, you might be ugly. You know, it really was sort of a striking response. And then the story coming out a few days later, we didn't have foreknowledge of that story, but clearly they must have known it was in the ether. Clearly they're sensitive about these strikes. The president is walking away saying, you know, I wasn't involved. I didn't support that second follow-on strike, the double tap strike. Pete Hegseth has changed his story, so they're clearly sensitive about it. But, you know, again, I think particularly when you see that, you know, when there's a different president in office, Pete Hegseth is happy to talk about the ethos of the military, which is true. You swear an oath to the Constitution and not to any one president. It just sort of made it a little bit more clear why they reacted so strongly.
Did you have reason to suspect that they had issued illegal orders before you made the video?
Well, we made the video because we were all separately getting so much outreach, frankly, for the better part of a year, but certainly this fall, from folks in uniform, from new veterans, from folks in the intelligence community who were saying, like, look, I'm worried I'm going to be asked to do something illegal, especially, frankly, troops in our streets, in our cities. I think there was a lot of concern about that. But then since early September, a lot of concern from people at Southcom, people in the chain of command, people seeing purges of general officers who were involved in those operations, people seeing the JAG officers removed and saying, like, I'm concerned about this. I don't know, right? So we made that video because the demand signal was very strong. And again, we didn't have foreknowledge of the Washington Post story, but it also doesn't surprise me that those stories are now surfacing.
Let me ask you to just take us through. It feels like if you are in the military or you're a military spouse or family, it is the worst thing you can say about a man or woman serving their country to accuse them of a war crime. Can you explain to us why the second strike would constitute a war crime?
Well, look, I think we need to know more information. I'm not willing to say because I haven't seen the video. We don't have transparency and accountability from Pete Hegseth. We don't know exactly what happened, and there's a lot of confusing information. But I do think that, you know, there are things like the law of war, which have been around for a very long time, which guide our military and all other militaries of democracies, that are a set of standards. And particularly, you know, again, if the facts bear out this way, that folks were, you know, obviously in the water, they were no longer a threat, then there are real concerns I have about the law of war and whether it violated that. But I think, you know, to be honest, we are, what to me as someone who's worked alongside the military my entire career, I never want American citizens thinking, you know, and questioning their military. I want them to feel confident that this is the best fighting force in the world and they uphold a set of standards. And to me, leadership comes from the top. I need to know that the leaders of the Department of Defense are upholding a standard and that we can feel good about as Americans. So I think you know, the details, I'm just not going to say what the details are when I don't know them. But we want to make sure we're upholding a very high standard as the American military.
The Washington Post reports about a missile being launched off of the coast of Trinidad and setting the vessel on fire from bow to stern. And then on the video, the live feed, which Pete Hegseth said he was watching and now says he wasn't watching, that there were 2 people seen alive, and a shock went through the room from the people that were watching. In your experience on the intelligence side of being in country during operations, how many people more or less would have access to the recorded video of that operation?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's lots of communications that go on when you're talking about operations, right? There's a ton of operational ways that we retain information. Video is one. I honestly do not know how many people have access to that video. Obviously, they put it out into the media or a part of it. And so I think there's lots of folks, even in the public affairs department, who have had access to that video. It exists and it's around, but there are other ways. You know, there are chats that go on, operational chats that we want to have happen when things like this go on. So there's lots of different ways. I think the most important thing, though, is, the Secretary of Defense, any Secretary of Defense, is really the buck stops with him. And I've seen secretaries of defense under Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. Lots of stuff happens that a secretary of defense doesn't like or doesn't know about always. But you got to take accountability. You got to say, here, look, this is what happened. I want to be transparent, and here's what we're going to do to change or to improve or to make it, better. That's what we're asking for. Come and have a hearing, sit down in front of the American people and explain the situation. And I think that's what's hard for a lot of people is watching the secretary now turn and blame it on the uniformed military, back away from statements he himself has made. It's like clearly the buck doesn't stop with him. And that's been a theme for this secretary.
With Trump Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who faces allegations of having committed or overseen a war crime. And against that backdrop, a new internal Pentagon report, which is done by these watchdogs. You may remember Trump ousted many of them. You may remember the reports and the concerns from lawyers and nonpartisan legal experts about why you need those watchdogs in government, totally apart from whether you voted for or like a given administration. Well, here's an example of a watchdog doing its work, because while it appears that Mr. Hegseth did not participate or cooperate meaningfully, and we'll get to that, the watchdog at the Pentagon has found that nonetheless, based on the evidence they gathered, he put his employees, service members, at risk. And that's in a scandal you might remember, the intelligence failures and mistakes committed by Hegseth and others in what they called Signalgate for the name of the app they used. So this is the Inspector General report. It centers around the messages sent from high-ranking Trump national security officials. That included the vice president, the CIA director, the then national security advisor, and others. At the time, they were discussing U.S. strikes in Yemen. These messages were sent on this secret app, Signal, which, as a reminder, is something that civilians and random people sometimes use for a layer of security, although the government can tell you Signal is not like magic. You can get a hold of Signal chats, as these people ultimately found. And remember, they have a lot more secure material available to them that apparently they just flouted and didn't use. Now, the initial mistake that teed this off was a journalist, the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg, who was added to the chat. An unclassified version of the Watchdog report is set to come out tomorrow, but we're already getting glimpses of it, and it's going to Congress. There's a source who has knowledge of the report and tells MS Now that it found Hegseth put the operations and service people at risk with his Signal mistake. Hegseth sent messages that included information about targets, weapons that the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing according to the information we initially already had from the Atlantic. Sources also say that Hegseth refused an interview request and would not turn over his phone. So you have this kind of watchdog investigation, and then you have, of course, powerful people who sometimes flout it. But again, for someone who was just using Signal willy-nilly, the question is, if he would send these messages, including accidentally or not to a reporter, why wouldn't he trust or cooperate with his own Pentagon team to get to the bottom of this? And by the way, people in government are humans. Humans make mistakes. If you make a mistake, that is, you don't try to leak information, you're not trying to hurt the troops, but you made a mistake and now you want to clean it up and say, hey, let's not do that again. Well, the usual proper course would be to cooperate confidentially with your own Pentagon investigation. Address the problem, put together preventive measures, and move forward. According to the reporting we have, and we'll update it as we get it, Hegseth did not do that, did not cooperate. And the report finds he violated department policy. That is, of course, the ongoing sort of runway on a story that made big waves when it first happened so long ago. Then there is the very recent story where the probes are just getting started of an alleged war crime that was conducted under Hegseth's leadership. Who might ultimately be held responsible for that is, of course, an intricate military and legal question. A reminder, of course, the military is, in our country, governed by its own uniform code of military justice. There is a different legal system, if you saw A Few Good Men, that oversees that, separate from, say, just the random federal courts that others deal in. And so there will be a real military legal investigation here if the process works. And then there is also Congress, which currently has calls from Democrats and Republicans to get to the bottom of this, to interview the necessary individuals, and some saying Hegseth has lost confidence and may ultimately have to leave this office. If you go over to conservative media, the Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal says Hegseth must, of course, testify under oath about this, while the commanding officer, Admiral Mitch Brady, will be giving a classified briefing to lawmakers tomorrow. Hegseth has faced criticism for his odd public and at times, frankly, Orwellian messages that he's rushed to post about Bradley. You know, this is often a very content-oriented social media type cabinet. And so he rushed onto social media platforms and X to post things that seem to pin the blame on this individual while also claiming to take some sort of higher ground. Quote, Admiral Bradley's an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. Fine, but look at the next part. I stand by him in the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and on all others since. That phrasing has roiled the Pentagon and plenty of military allies who look at it as, in the middle of this process and investigation, the secretary jumping out to say he made these calls as if there was no oversight. Of course, we have civilian oversight of the military in this country, and currently that is done by Pete Hegseth. His argument is this is the fog of war. Many people have pointed out there is no declared war. Congress has certainly not voted to authorize a war. You would have noticed if that happened. And so the administration finds itself stretched very far on this very regrettable, probable tragedy. Stretched from a war they have not declared or gotten legal authority for, all the way out to these operations that, when they go a certain way, the Pentagon and the Trump media machine are quick to basically push out as a kind of video content to show what they're doing against perhaps drug boats. We don't know. You need to check the evidence on each one, and against the wider foreign threats that they say are so central to their priorities. But stretched across that is a question of whether they committed a clear war crime by doing something that is very clearly banned. Everyone who's ever practiced law or been in the military knows about this. You don't shoot down innocent parachuters, even if they were moments ago waging war, because they become people that you try to lawfully take control of as combatants, as prisoners of war, but you don't go around executing people. And that's war. Remember what I said, they're stretched way away from war because these weren't uniformed foreign adversaries of some other country. These are boats full of people who, if they're doing bad things, can be caught and dealt with like normal, but aren't engaged in war against us as a factual matter.
And it's a catastrophe. I think Pete Hegseth, it's impossible to imagine that he survives this as Secretary of Defense. I think he must resign, and I think Republicans will ask for that ultimately once they investigate this. But this is a disaster for this generation of people serving in the United States military. And that is a tragedy more than a farce.
A tragedy more than a farce. Lives have already been lost. Some of them, according to the evidence emerging, were people that should not, under our laws of war, have been killed. Period. Who is responsible for that? In the gravest sense, morally and legally, is a process question. It is not something that can be resolved by one video or one leak or one article. But as Rachel put it there, it is the type of catastrophe that has a lot riding on it right now. I've got special guests. We're back on this in 90 seconds.